Our third panelist is Alina Zubkovych. She is Deputy Director of the Ukrainian Institute of Sweden and a research fellow at the Södertörn University. Her current academic project focuses on the cultural representation of Crimean Tatars in Ukraine through media discourses and visual culture. Her academic interests embrace memory studies, social, cultural, and political transformation of Eastern and Southeastern Europe, ethnicity and national identification, museum studies, and migration. Alina is the author of the monograph Dealing with the Yugoslav Past, Exhibition Reflections in the Successor States, which was published in 2017, and edited the volume Late Modernity in Transformations, Migrations, Culture, and Economics, published in 2015 in co-authorship with M. Makarovich and E. Danilova. And Alina will be talking about, her talk is entitled From Evge to Haytarma, Symbolic Narration of Home in Ukrainian Crimean Tatar Feature Films.
Thank you very much for your nice introduction. Hello, everyone. So today I'm going to talk about their Crimean Tatar representation in the current situation, and I will focus on the couple of methods and on the number of films, the feature films that were released since the annexation of Crimea, so since 2014. It is not their aesthetic analysis. I do not focus on the quality of the films. I'm more interested on the political discourses that go beyond the films. I'm more interested in how the narration is constructed, how the identity of being Crimean Tatar is reflected today in the films. And I have chosen those films that deal with the Crimean Tatar component, and usually these are the films made by the Crimean Tatar themselves. As for the films, there will be 4 of them. I will show that later. And as for the methods, it is their film analysis, but also in-depth, semi-structured interviews that I've conducted with their IDPs who live now in Kyiv and Lviv. But of course, I should mention that the term IDP tries to homogenize a lot of different people, and also once you start selecting people to have to interview them, it appears that some of them have been living in Kyiv or Lviv before. They were coming then back to Crimea, living for a while in Crimea, returning back. So it's much more complex than our imagination of being IDP could be. And these are people who work as activists. They were and continue to be somehow related to the Crimean Tatar NGOs, being the leaders of these NGOs or being the leaders of media outlets who have moved from Crimea to Kyiv. And also the last element that is used in this analysis is their interviews with one of the film directors we will be mentioning. I will be mentioning today. It is Nariman Aliyev, and his very recent film Evge that got a lot of international attention, and it would be very interesting to analyze his interviews together and to combine it with the answers of the IDPs that we have. So these are these 4 films. I start with Haytarma, even though it was released before the annexation, but it is quite difficult not to mention it today, since it is the first Crimean Tatar feature film that tells the story on the deportation, and it was released in 2013 by Crimean Tatar director that was mentioned today by his other film Cyborgs. And the same film, Haytarma, was funded by Crimean Tatar businessman Linur Islamov. Haytarma can be translated as return. It's the name of the traditional dance as well. The film was the first step to visualize their collective trauma of deportation. And the mass scenes were based on the participation of the local inhabitants. So a lot of local Crimean Tatars who have moved back to Crimea or who were already living there were participating in the films. And also it is mentioned that some of the cadres of the film are grounded on the personal stories of the filmmaker and the producer. For example, there is one cadre where one person, the lady give birth in a cadre, and it says that it's Lenur Islamov's grandmother. So her son is respectively his uncle. So this symbolic impact of the film is difficult to overestimate, and Jeffrey Alexander gives a good theoretical background for this by his social theory of trauma. I will not go into details with this, but of course the mediation of the collective memory of deportation is spoken here the most, and it becomes the nodal point of this narration. Similarly to another films which I will be mentioning later, Haytarma was selected by the Ukrainian Oscar Committee for the Academy Award submission. And what was happening since it was released, it got quite high attention by the local Crimean Tatar audience. So there were a number of screenings in the cinemas. There were some additional screenings in Simferopol, for example. But also there were some reactions already at that time by the Russian authorities. For example, the Consul General of Russia suggested in his interviews to some Russian media channels not to visit the premiere of the film. He has also reapproached Haytarma for not presenting the issue of collaboration and treachery. So very classic narrative which has the clear fit to their great patriotic war narrative, and Haytarma clearly deconstructs this classical narration. But and also I should mention that after the scandal, that moment, so it was still before the annexation, he has resigned. What's another aspect of Haytarma is that though it is different to their glorification narration that their traditional great patriotic discourse approaches, it still is based on selective historical material. And this is made to show the victimhood most visible. So the story of the main hero, Soviet Union hero pilot Crimean Tatar Ahmed Khan Sultan, who comes to visit his relatives, and the next day he becomes the witness of the deportation, excludes details of his own family story. For example, the film doesn't mention that film's prototype, real Sultan's father, was, for example, identified as Lak. This is the Northern Caucasus ethnic group native to the Dagestan area, and therefore was not subject to the deportation, or that his real brother Imran has served in the commander's office during the German occupation. At the post-war tribunal on his brother, Ahmed Khan tried to defend Imran and was explaining that it was impossible to avoid any cooperation with Nazi, even for the family of the hero of the Soviet Union during that period. So reference to this or similar complexity of the story would have contributed to the understanding of the complexity of this period. So the true story of Ahmed Khan's father would have demonstrated the cynicism of the Soviet politics of belonging to even higher extent, when registered nationality in the passport defined and fully controlled person's life and future. So, of course, different films have different promises and goals, and certainly this film had other goals than to talk about the complexity of the past. It's rather this representation, visual representation of the deportation. And so this has to be there, the elements of the video. I hope that we will be able just to see their its visual representation. Yeah, it is without sound. I just wanted you to have the impression of the way how it is, how it looks like. So this is Haytarma, and another film that you will see also here. It is called 87 Children. Before that, it was called Another's Prayer. Therefore, I took both names here, and it is the continuation of the same methodology of visualizing the scenes and talking about the Second World War. The second film is about the young lady who serves a Jew, being a Crimean Tatar during the Second World War. She helps 87 children of Jewish origin to survive the war. As with the Haytarma, it is claimed that it is based on the true experience, and such a person really lived, and her name was Arifova. But I cannot confirm whether it's true or not, because there are no historical evidence that I could ground my my conclusions. I will stop that. So they are making this the similar stylistics. So I think we can go further. And I would like to focus on one more thing that should be interesting in relation to the media narration that is constructed beyond the film. It is a small case of their. From the media outlets, when I was searching the ways how the Haytarma was presented in the media, I've noticed maybe a year ago that on one of their media outlets called Espresso, information that soon there will be their film called Haytarma, and we all welcome you to watch the film at our TV channel. Nothing special about this, and usually we do not read this sort of information. It is a routine announcement, nothing to care about. Only the fact that the day when Haytarma had to be presented was the 19th of April, and it was the official holiday with the distinct symbolic connotation. It was the Orthodox Easter. So it was very interesting. Then they decided to present Haytarma particularly on this day, and moreover, they decided that they should explain why do they do this. And it is. I hope that you can see it. Basically, it is their very interesting way of putting of how we put the new way of telling about Crimean Tatars and the Crimea. It is impossible not to project Easter. I'm reading what it was written there. It is impossible not to project Easter events on the reality in which we live. Knowing that resurrection was preceded by the torment and the crucifixion of Christ, we also think of today's injustice and repression in the worst tradition of the Stalin era in the occupied territories, in Crimea in particular. We believe that following the crucifixion of Crimea by Russia, its Crimean resurrection will follow as part of a united and independent Ukraine. Believe the author. And Espresso TV will show the Haytarma movie in the memory of the tortured Ukrainians in Crimea in solidarity with the persecuted Crimean Tatars. So by this we see how important it became, first of all, to notice the deportation, secondly, how the connotation of deportation has changed since it is becoming united with generally the victimhood narrative of the Ukrainian nation, and is somehow related to Holodomor in in such statements as well implicitly. And also, what's important about Haytarma is that its visual representation became associated with the deportation as such. So when you watch any media or journalist information about Crimea, or if there is any mention of Crimean Tatars, you will see the video from this film. So this film gets its own authenticity through this visualization. So now it became some sort of simulacrum with its own sense of authenticity. The next one is a very interesting case. It is the fairy tale Haytarma, and it is unique of its kind because it's the first used story on the medieval Crimea, the first Crimean Tatar fairy tale. I will also try. Yeah, good. It is not the trailer, but this is the video from the premiere that took place in Kiev just last year. And what's important about it is the politicization that became the important feature of the public events related to the youth film. So, for example, you see here the producer of the film that tells about the as she called this, culturological aspect of the film, and that it's primarily a cultural product for youth to know more about their medieval Crimea. And there is the emphasis in this video and in other presentations to tell that this film is about the true spirit of medieval Crimea, of Crimean Khanate, because different elements that were used to make the film were coming from were authentic, they were old, and therefore, since they were used in this film, the film also starts representing something that was truly authentic. What about the politicization? So, first of all, the focus on the first of all, it was, for example, Mustafa Djemilev who was invited to attend the premiere. Moreover, he was invited to give a speech at the cinema hall where he urged Crimean Tatars to be strong and united at the times of the occupation of the motherland. Moreover, there was the ambassador of Turkey to Ukraine at the same screening. Maybe he will appear later in this trailer. Who also mentioned that it's important for Crimean Tatar identity to, you see now Mustafa Djemilev. So the ambassador mentioned it's important and to preserve Crimean Tatar identity, which we should support the films like this. So and here is the ambassador. Moreover, when I started analyzing in what way media outlets were mentioned in this film, in Ukrainian media outlets, it appeared that it had also the relation to the situation with the security service of Ukraine. And I checked the site, the SBU, so the Secret Service of Ukraine, who mentioned that they have prevented the provocation led by the Kremlin. So the official page of SBU and it contained the report of this prevention of the Kremlin-controlled fake nationalist protesters who were to prevent the screening. It is interesting because the premiere that took place in Kiev was very different from premieres in other cities, and usually we do not analyze them or do not bring that focus to presentations. So, for example, this film, it had premieres both in Crimea and also in Russia, and when it was presented in Moscow, of course, the narration the connotation of this film was slightly different, and the focus of the producer was to mention that it's more for compatriots to come together and to think about their about the cultural project and about the youth that lives now in different parts of the country. But of course, we have to understand that for their production company that is now located in Crimea, called Crimean Tatars. It's the name of this Crimean-based internet resource that was making the film, helping to make the film. It is quite, it is very difficult to articulate everything clearly, and therefore this discourse of compatriots is much more neutral and much more obvious thing to have there. Finally, I would like to talk today about the most interesting film in terms of analysis and the complexity that it brings. It is called Evge, or Homeward. It is a very interesting case because, first of all, Nariman Aliyev, who is a film director, has made this film, thank you, just recently, and it is his first feature film. It is tremendous success for the film like this, both in terms of the topic and also in terms of his age. To be screened at the Cannes Film Festival, it got there the very good reception at different international film festivals, and also it became the winner of Odessa Film Festival. So it really got a lot of attention, and I think it is on the 2nd of November that there will be the premiere in Ukraine of this film, so it is the ongoing story. So it is much more different compared to all films that I mentioned today, because what we see here, it is the minimalism in terms of the number of people who we see at the screen, and also this I mentioned, and also the topic. It's much more complex interpretation of the war and of the condition of the person in the current occupied Crimea, and so if we take the synopsis, it is the way how Nariman has mentioned it. It is the story of the father Mustafa, who comes to visit his elder son. To visit his son and to transfer the body of his elder son, who was the volunteer or the soldier at the at the war, back to Crimea. And so during this trip, they try to solve the problems and to find a common language with his young son. So it is basically the story, the on the move. It's the road story. It is the trip with their father and son all the time in this permanent communication between each other, and with misunderstanding of each other sometimes. And father represents their conservative, old-fashioned, somehow Crimean Tatar experience of being there, the person who came from deported country, while his son is more cosmopolite, and he was born already in Ukraine, and he doesn't understand certain things as father think. And if you take some elements to analyze, it is first of all language. It became very interesting how Nariman plays with the language issues, because he has 3 languages there. And it is Crimean Tatar, it is Ukrainian, it's Russian. And when it is Crimean Tatar language, it's always father who is talking to son, or son who answers to the father. Ukrainian is used when son is talking to the entire world, and also when the local Ukrainian authorities are talking to the father, or or to the son. Finally, Russian language is used when father is talking to people around. So by this, it could be also interpreted like a identification model that Nariman tries to bring, showing some sort of Ukrainian identity, Ukrainian Crimean Tatar identity, and Crimean Tatar equal to Muslim identity. Though I would say that the way how he has created the image of the father is slightly irrealistic, non-realistic, because those elements of being truly successor of the Muslim heritage with all these elements of speaking Crimean Tatar language and searching for the Quran, the most important book when coming to the house of their of his son's apartment. Looks like it's more the image that Nariman tries to construct in order to basically represent something that is being in search and in construction. And if we analyze what was the director's statement on this, I took it from the festival website, where it is visible that he is articulating that he is a Crimean Tatar, and he tells a lot about the annexation and the hybrid war. And finally, he mentions. Oh, sorry. Finally, he mentions that. With the personal story, he tries to have a bridge for understanding who Crimean Tatars are. And this articulation is very important during his presentations, and we should take into account that it's important part of the film screening when you have the filmmaker who is telling about the film. So when analyzing different interviews with Nariman, I thought that one of them was very fruitful. It was called Coming Out, and it resonates very much with the answers I got from my respondents on the question of language and the question of identity. And first of all, it's maybe a lot to read, but the main idea here, he was asked about the quotas. Do Crimean Tatars in Ukraine today need certain quotas to make the films in Crimean Tatar language? And he mentioned that it's not in the moment that it should be done, because we still struggle to make Ukrainian the background or monolithic language in Ukraine, and so he tells a lot about this. And also he articulates that the person born in Russian-speaking society who doesn't know Crimean Tatar very well, he speaks in Ukrainian in the media during his interviews. Similar positions I also had from my respondents, who were mentioning that though in their everyday life they speak mostly Russian, if it is the younger generation, that they have acquired, of course, also Ukrainian, but it is something that they would like to develop more, and it would be great for them to speak Ukrainian much better. With the Crimean Tatar language, it is the same problem. They mentioned that their knowledge of the language is limited, and there are a couple of possibilities to study Crimean Tatar language today in Ukraine. There have appeared programs at Crimean House, and by the way, Crimean House is also the institution that has appeared only since 2014. But the situation in Crimea is much more harsh in terms of this. And another question, I think it's also important, it is about their special quotas for particularly having the Crimean Tatars films. his answer is that we do not need this quota today in Ukraine, because if you have their film that is dealing with Crimean Tatar questions, it can be easily supported if it is of good quality, and also that that there are not that many filmmakers of Crimean Tatar origin in Ukraine so far that have could apply for this. Therefore, we should wait once we have much more of them to have such quotas. Finally, the question of reintegration and the question of certain conditions that Crimean Tatar have to get when, if there will be and when there will be their reintegration was questioned, and it. And I think that there is the very important issue that he mentions. It is the condition in Crimea. He mentioned that 5 years ago or 6, those children who were in the age of 11, 12, since the annexation, they didn't have any Ukraine education, and therefore now, if the students, we are losing the students, and they don't know Ukrainian language, and they, as he called them, they could have a different mentality. So this is the big problem, and that's why. It is important to have the Crimean Tatar autonomy, but no one or not many people are talking about it today. This is the quotation of from the IDPs. For example, this person of 48 years old, entrepreneur from Kyiv, he mentioned this reflection on their Crimean Tatar autonomy and why it's important. And basically, it is continually repeating. He is continually repeating the idea of Ukraine as the big homeland and Crimea as the small one. This statement is continuously visible in the interviews that I had. Finally, another quotation. This is the last one from their respondent, the student from Lviv, who talked a lot about the situation in Crimea, and she mentions that she feels so insolent there, and she doesn't believe that it could happen at the moment. So this is it. I will come to the conclusions, and this aspect of absolutely unclear continuation of the situation with occupied Crimea is probably something that would be reflected further in the films. And if we return back to the idea of home in the films, it is also the constant process of searching for this identification. So what is home for their Artem Saytablayev and his Haytarma? It is the lost Crimea, and it is the articulated Crimean Tatar Crimea. What's this? What the home for Evge? It is. It brings much more complex development to the context, and articulates that there is the search, there is the gap, and there are very diverse interpretation of these identities that are visible today by the Crimean Tatars who have left Crimea or who stayed there. I will. Yeah, thank you very much.